Trainers' misjudgments, especially when getting too close to captive orcas, can spell tragedy. Unfortunate incidents and bizarre twists of fate underscore the risk involved when dealing with nature and its apex predators. These are the chilling stories that highlight the consequences of pushing boundaries with these powerful marine creatures. And if you find yourself frightened, don't say you weren't warned. It's common knowledge that Hollywood is full of fake stories, overactive imaginations, and made-up fictional personas. But what happens when you discover that there's something much more sinister lurking below the surface? An outright deception that caused a tragic end to the star. And that star wasn't a famous actor, but rather an animal. This was Namu, an orca whose tragic real-life story sharply contrasted with the uplifting tale of Namu, my best friend. His life became a movie, celebrated and adored by many for decades. Yet just 2 weeks before the film premiered, Namu died due to horrendous living conditions, leaving a stark contrast to the gentle, playful creature on screen. His death was a brutal reminder of the impact of human decisions on killer whales. However, Namu's story doesn't end in tragedy, but rather it became a wake-up call, saving many of his kind from similar fates and transformed the world's perception of orcas. Namu was an adult male orca who lived a remarkable life, leaving a lasting impact on the way people viewed his kind. His story began in the waters of the Pacific Northwest in 1965, where he was born as a member of the C1 pod of the Northern Resident Community, a well-known Northern Resident orca pod in British Columbia. A few months after his birth, Namu's life took an unexpected turn. He was discovered entangled in a 22-foot salmon net near Namu, British Columbia, by a fisherman named William Leck-Kobit. This accidental encounter led to a life-altering change. Namu the orca was subsequently sold to Ted Griffin, the owner of the Seattle Marine Aquarium, for $8,000. Griffin saw potential in this magnificent creature and decided to bring him to Seattle, a journey that took Namu 450 miles south of where he was. Ted Griffin's first encounter with Namu was astonishing. As Griffin approached the sea pen assembled for Namu's transport to Seattle, he saw the massive orca looming just 4 feet away. It was a moment that would define their bond. Namu made his presence known with a loud squeak, and Griffin responded with and in less than a second, Namu echoed back with a squeak of his own. The connection was immediate. It was a costly endeavor, but Namu's presence would soon prove to be worth it to Ted. When Namu finally arrived in Seattle on July 28, 1965, Griffin was greeted as a hero and even received a key to the city. In captivity, Namu's daily diet consisted of 400 pounds of salmon each day. He quickly became a star attraction at the Seattle Marine Aquarium, drawing crowds of fascinated people eager to witness this remarkable creature up close. The word of Namu's arrival spread like wildfire. People wanting to see him caused traffic jams for miles near Deception Pass Bridge. Namu was basically the first orca to perform in public. As time passed, Griffin saw that Namu needed a friend, so he brought a female orca named Shamu to be his companion. Shamu would later gain her own fame at SeaWorld in San Diego. Namu and Shamu's relationship in captivity brought even more attention to these incredible animals. In the weeks that followed, Namu became a sensation in Seattle. Thousands paid to catch a glimpse of the killer whale at Griffin's Seattle Marine Aquarium at Pier 56. The city was in the midst of Namu fever, and the craze didn't stop there. Around the world, people were captivated by the idea of killer whales as performing attractions, which led to a surge in the capture of killer whales from Puget Sound, the primary source of supply for orcas. Over a decade, from the mid-1960s to 1976, approximately 270 orcas were captured, with Puget Sound serving as a central hunting ground. Namu's extraordinary life didn't just capture the attention of only those who visited the Seattle Marine Aquarium. It also attracted Hollywood. In a turn of events that seemed almost like a script from a movie itself, Namu became the star of a Hollywood production that left a lasting impact on the way people perceived killer whales. It all began when Ted Griffin recognized the potential for Namu to be more than just an aquarium exhibit. Namu's presence and the ability to perform with humans in the water made him a unique and charismatic figure. Soon, he caught the eye of Hollywood producers. In the mid-1960s, the film industry was eager for new stories and fresh perspectives. Namu's life was seen as a unique opportunity to change the public's perception of killer whales. Until then, these animals had often been portrayed as vicious killers, similar to mindless and ruthless predators like sharks. However, Namu, the killer whale, aimed to change that narrative. The film was released in 1966 and offered a heartwarming and idolized story of a man and a heroic killer whale. While the film may have had its share of sentimentality, it played a significant role in shifting public perceptions of killer whales. The film starred Robert Lansing as Hank, a marine biologist determined to protect Namu from a group of small-town fishermen who feared the orca was ruining their salmon stocks and posed a threat to their community. Lansing's character attempted to fight the fear of orcas with scientific knowledge, highlighting that their relative brain size was larger than that of humans. It's a story about a marine biologist named Hank Donner. Hank was out camping in the Pacific Northwest, studying the underwater creatures that called those waters home. One day, as Hank and his local assistant were watching a group of gray whales swim by, something terrible happened. They saw two fishermen shooting at a bunch of orcas. One of them got injured and ended up on the shore, where she sadly passed away. Her mate, on the other hand, stuck around, mourning her loss. Hank wouldn't stand for the hunting of the second orca, and he managed to set up a net barrier to keep the cove safe. This male killer whale became the star, and they named him Namu after a song in the movie. The locals, except for one lady named Kate and her daughter, didn't trust Hank. As Hank watched over Namu, he started to play with him. As time went on, some of the local kids came to the cove, and they started feeding Namu. One day, a boy stuck a sharp hook into a piece of fish and gave it to Namu, which made him go wild. The whole town got wind of what happened, and they decided it was time to take matters into their own hands. They marched down to the cove, armed and ready to kill Namu. It looked pretty grim for our killer whale friend, but Hank figured out what was causing Namu's suffering. To prove that the orca was peaceful, Hank put on some swimming gear and jumped into the water with him. This sight started to change the minds of the angry townsfolk. After all this excitement, Namu was ready for a change. He met another group of killer whales, and they all swam away into the open sea. The film explained that the understanding and connecting with these creatures was possible, and that they were not the monsters some had believed them to be. The name Namu would later be used as a show name for various orcas and SeaWorld performances. Despite its impact, the film faced challenges, including the untimely death of Namu just 2 weeks before its premiere. This event undoubtedly dampened the initial excitement surrounding the premiere. Tragically, Namu's time in captivity was relatively short-lived. After the filming of Namu, the killer whale concluded, Namu was returned to his small pen on Seattle's Pier 56. Unfortunately, this move proved detrimental to his health, and on July 9, 1966, he passed away. Griffin, despite mixed feelings, said that Namu had succeeded in a supposed break for freedom, which ultimately led to his death. However, an autopsy revealed that Namu had been suffering from an acute bacterial infection, skin rashes, breathing problems, and a stomach infection likely contracted from sewage runoff in Elliott Bay, where Griffin had relocated him. Despite Namu's untimely death, the impact he had on people was undeniable. Thousands of local fans mourned his passing, and the aquariums around the world were inspired to obtain their own captive orcas. Namu, the killer whale, was later renamed Namu, My Best Friend, and found a second life on television. It was played often for approximately 40 years. For centuries, the native people of the Pacific Northwest revered orcas, seeing them as family members and respected creatures of the sea. However, the newcomers, especially salmon fishermen who viewed orcas as competitors, these creatures were considered vermin and dangerous killers. This led to a disturbing chapter where orcas were hunted, mutilated, and even used for target practice by the U.S. Navy in Icelandic waters. Ted Griffin's decision to capture Namu alive marked a turning point in the understanding of killer whales. He saw Namu not as a threat, but as a companion and a friend. Namu's capture and subsequent interactions with Ted Griffin proved a unique opportunity to study and learn about these mysterious creatures. Griffin's encounters with Namu, which included touching and even riding the orca, were groundbreaking and captured the world's attention. But Ted blamed himself for Namu's death and continued to work on helping orcas. In August 1970, he encountered a superpod of 90 to 100 orcas. possibly the entire southern resident population captured behind nets. Realizing that he had more whales than he could safely handle, Griffin ordered most of them to be released, causing tensions with his partners and the fishermen involved. The Pen Cove capture marked a turning point. It led to public outcry, legal intervention, and eventually the end of orca captures in the United States. Was the price Namu paid worth it for saving his kind? Did Ted Griffin repay what he owed Namu? He supposedly loved him, but the animal died due to human error and a greed for entertainment. Ken Peters had worked as a trainer for 11 years, but he never expected to be attacked during his career at SeaWorld. As the female orca, Kasatka, dragged him under, he couldn't stop thinking that this was how his life would end. The orca continued toying with him, thrashing him around in the water and dragging him to the bottom of the pool 3 times. People watched in horror as the agitated whale attacked him. Ken desperately tried to escape, but Kasatka would not let go. With only fractions of a second left before Ken would lose his life, an idea suddenly emerged, one that would soon become his lifeline. Since the first orca named Shamu performed at SeaWorld San Diego in 1960, there has never been a year without an incident. The marine park, famous for its killer whale performances in Orlando and San Diego, has often been criticized for the deadly risk they pose to humans, but the park went ahead anyway. These were almost 22-foot-long, 5,000-pound animals captured brutally from their environment, the vast expanses of the ocean, to live in tiny tanks, which often took a toll on their mental health. However, it was a problem that the authorities and trainers just didn't care to acknowledge. The success and thrill of the amazing orca performances were echoed every time by the fascinated crowds yelling Shamu, in an ironic salute to an animal who despised being there. Ken Peters had been trained well, and his experience had paid off on November 29, 2006. There had been countless incidents involving the female orca, Kasatka. She had bumped, bitten, battered, and dragged people into her pool, but her attack on Ken Peters was unimaginable. Even though SeaWorld had witnessed orca attacks in the past, it was nothing new. Kasatka, for all her tantrums, was never expected to go that far, but something had agitated the orca at that very moment, causing her to lose it and ravage Ken Peters.
The public saw the video, the full video, and it was way more dramatic than I had been led to believe.
Kasatka was not just a star of SeaWorld San Diego, she was the matriarch of the marine park. Kasatka was the first captive killer whale to conceive from artificial insemination, giving birth to almost 11 babies in captivity. Now that makes her a celebrity, but just like Tilikum, a notorious rebel orca who often made headlines with his aggression, Kasatka was no less. Kasatka was captured off the coast of Iceland on October 26, 1978. She was a young 2-year-old female, swimming happily with friend Kahana when both were ambushed and housed in a sea pen in Grindavik. Within a few months, Kasatka was sold to SeaWorld, where she was made to live in training captivity. While Kasatka went through her training routines well enough to be turned into a performing whale, she was not very happy there. And when you are taken from an environment with endless water and made to live in a tiny little tank just a little bit bigger than you, mental trauma and frustration will set in. The first warning signs of Kasatka's aggression manifested in 1993, and ironically, it was Ken Peters who she chose as her first victim. Kasatka tried tearing into Peters. While orcas may not possess the razor-sharp teeth of sharks, they remain fully capable of wreaking brutal and catastrophic havoc. Luckily, Peters got away, and as incredible and astonishing as it sounds, Kasatka again tried biting Peters in 1999. Now, what was going on? Here was this gigantic whale who seemed to have formed a bond with one of the most experienced trainers in SeaWorld. She performed well with Peters in the water, and both were veterans of the marine park. Did Kasatka see Peter as nothing more than a plaything, or maybe a potential prey? Orcas have this sadistic habit of toying with their game in the water. They will toss around dolphins, seals, and even sharks, playing water rugby with them. Besides Peters, there were other incidents involving Kasatka, but Peters was clearly her favorite, whom she had constantly been trying to have a go at. On November 30th, 2006, Kasatka got her chance and took it. It was a fabulous sunny day at SeaWorld San Diego, and as usual, there were packed crowds. Ken Peters was getting ready for his performance with Kasatka. The female orca was on her best behavior, or was it all an act where she had something sinister going on in her mind? Peters was getting Kasatka ready. He had signaled her to come onto the pool surface, as was the traditional entry, while another trainer stood at the side clapping and pepping up the crowd. Peters hugged Kasatka, after which the whale just side splashed into the water. She looked like she was truly enjoying herself, and Peters did too. The whale then bobbed out of the water and gave Peters the nose greeting, and frankly, from the perspective of an audience, that looked adorable. It was then Peters' turn to get into the water, and he dove into the pool. Ken Peters might have been the oldest trainer in SeaWorld, but he loved his job. He was enthusiastic about every performance. Despite having been attacked in the past by Kasatka, he never harbored a grudge and regarded it as just a whale having an off day. Peters submerged below the surface, ready to perform the favorite stunt enjoyed by trainers, and that was to emerge from the water, standing on the whale's snout. It thrilled the crowd as well. Something went wrong though. Where was Peters? As Peters disappeared into the pool, trainers on the edge waited anxiously to see him surface, but he did not. After a minute or so, there was a brief hint and a sigh of relief as they saw the large black shadow of Kasatka rising. But then something terrifying happened. Kasatka did not emerge entirely and instead, like a crocodile, spiraled into a death roll, thrashing Peters as she did so. At that moment, Peters was briefly taken aback by what was happening. Why did Kasatka throw him over? Before he could recompose himself, Kasatka grabbed Peters by the foot and tossed him around briefly before submerging again. By now, more trainers had gathered onto the pool's edge. Some were terrified. There have been several incidents of unpredictable orca behavior in SeaWorld branches across the country, most at Orlando and SeaWorld. Just 8 years ago, a young trainer, Keltie Byrne, was killed by Nuka 4, a male orca at Sealand on the Pacific of Victoria, British Columbia. Kasatka too had known to attack trainers, had she finally gone over the edge. It was an agonizing 30-second wait with the people just watching the swirling water, not knowing what was happening with Peters in the pool. Horrifying underwater video footage revealed how Kasatka had Peters' foot in her mouth. She kept dragging him around, and if it continued for longer, Peters would not have survived. There is no way of knowing how long a trainer can withstand such trauma underwater. Fortunately, Kasatka resurfaced, and Peters was seen doing the unthinkable. He was rubbing the orca's back and trying to calm the killer whale down, despite being injured. Kasatka just wouldn't give up on Peters, who was dragged down again a couple more times. Finally, when Kasatka let go, Peters made a dash to swim for his life. Kasatka, enraged, possibly at his escape, followed him. She was not done with Peters, and knowing an orca, playthings usually end up in a kill. It was Peters' only chance, and he took it. As unbearable as it was, his foot bleeding, his body bitten, he swam possibly the fastest swim of his life. Luckily, Kasatka was obstructed by several buoys thrown in the water by trainers trying to distract her. Peters made it and was quickly pulled onto the edge of the pool by the others. After reaching safety, his body gave way and he just collapsed on the wet tiles out of exhaustion. Thankfully, Peters was not severely injured. His foot was broken and there were teeth marks on various parts of his body.
A SeaWorld trainer is recovering today.
do that? We may never know. The tale of Kandu was far from the happy image sold to the public. Fans cheered for her spectacular tricks, not knowing the misery she faced behind the scenes. Her distress came to a head in a chilling incident that unfolded in front of a live audience. It was a tragedy where Kandu viciously attacked her fellow orca counterpart and suffered fatal injuries, opened the world's eyes to the dark side of animal performances in captivity, and eventually led to the eventual ban of such shows. This is the tale of Kandu, the beloved orca whose life was tragically cut short in a feat for human entertainment. Kandu was captured in the late 1970s in Iceland, a place well known for its rich marine life and breathtaking landscapes, standing as a prime location for orca sightings in its abundance of salmon. It all began during a time when there was a growing interest in orcas, so marine parks were increasingly seeking to acquire these amazing animals for public display. Kandu was captured on October 10, 1977, at approximately 3 years of age. Like many other orcas of her time, Kandu's capture involved a controversial and harrowing process. Orcas are highly intelligent and social creatures, and capturing them is no easy task. A team of experts first had to locate a suitable orca pod. Pods are tight-knit family groups, and separating a young orca from its pod was the first step. These pods were usually identified by air surveillance. Once the pod was located, boats were sent out to surround the orcas in a process known as a roundup. The boats gradually led the pod into a smaller area where the separation began. Orcas like Kandu are taken while still young, and the process of separating them from their mothers is very traumatic for the calf. After forcing the orcas into a small area, the boats placed nets in the targeted areas of the water. The nets were positioned in such a way that the young orcas would be separated from the rest of their pod. Once the young orca was separated, it was gently put into a net that was lowered into the water. This container was then lifted onto a boat, and the orca was transported to a new destination. The name Kandu carries a special significance, and it reflects the cultural importance of orcas in indigenous communities. It was chosen by her captors as a way of acknowledging the indigenous communities of the Salish region. For the Salish people and other indigenous groups in the area, orcas hold a prominent place in their culture and mythology. Before Kandu ended up at SeaWorld, she was bumped around to a few other marine parks. Kandu was initially transported to Marine World Africa, USA, located in Vallejo, California. At this park, she was trained and showcased as a performing orca. This was a popular marine park at the time before relocating to Vallejo, California. After spending some time at Marine World, Kandu was transferred to Six Flags over Georgia, where she continued to perform and entertain park visitors. She also had a brief stay at the Ontario Place Marina in Toronto, Canada. This wasn't only characteristical for Kandu. During this era, orcas were frequently moved between marine parks, performing at different locations across North America. These moves were a part of a business arrangement among the parks. Kandu's journey eventually led her to SeaWorld, one of the most well-known marine life entertainment parks in the world. She arrived at SeaWorld San Diego in California in the 70s, where she spent a significant part of her life as one of the park's star attractions. At SeaWorld, Kandu became a beloved figure for many visitors. She was known for her remarkable performances and the strong bond she formed with her trainers. Kandu was a young and energetic orca, which made her an ideal candidate for the park's shows and entertainment. From the moment she arrived, her energy made her a beloved figure at the park. This orca was known for forming close relationships with her trainers. The bonds young orcas form with trainers are essential for their training and safety during performances. These trainers spent countless hours with them, bonding and teaching various tricks and commands. These close interactions help to create trust and mutual understanding between orcas and their human companions. Kandu adapted easily and liked her trainers, so learning tricks and performing was a piece of cake. She was a star that wowed audiences with her agility, speed, and intelligence. Her performances often consisted of impressive jumps, flips, and synchronized movements with other orcas. In addition to her entertainment, Kandu also played a role in educating the public about orcas and marine life. Her shows were designed to teach people about the beauty and complexity of these creatures and help raise awareness about the importance of ocean conservation and the need to protect marine ecosystems. Kandu's life at SeaWorld was marked by several significant events, one of which was the birth of her first calf. This event brought both joy and challenges to her life in captivity. In 1986, Kandu gave birth to her first calf after she became pregnant with a male named Winston. Sadly, the calf was stillborn on January 31, 1986. The loss of her first calf was a heart-wrenching experience for Kandu and the SeaWorld staff who had been eagerly anticipating his arrival. But she continued to work and was introduced a year later to a male and female orca, Orca 2 and Corky 2, who were moved to San Diego. She soon became pregnant for the second time, and her daughter was named Orchid, after her father who had passed away just after her birth. Ultimately, it was just Kandu, Orchid, and Corky left at the park, and this is when the problems began. Kandu started behaving dominantly the moment she met Corky, and started having even more problems after Corky became close to Orchid. She even snapped at the trainers multiple times during training and performances, but was still put out as an attraction. This is not a typical behavior for orcas, as they all become close in the pods, but Kandu didn't know that, and she was very protective of her daughter, but still, they were kept together in the same tank. On August 21, 1989, a tragic incident unfolded at SeaWorld San Diego, leaving a lasting impact on both the park and those who witnessed the events, and many people did witness it. On that day, Kandu was participating in a Shamu show, one of SeaWorld's signature killer whale performances. She was performing alongside Corky. The audience was watching as they showed their abilities in the water. During the performance, Kandu was in one of the side pools, while Corky was the main attraction in the central show pool. Kandu was already outraged before that, and very protective of her baby. As the show progressed, Kandu became increasingly agitated, especially when Corky approached Orchid. In response, Kandu tried to assert her dominance over Corky through a behavior known as racking. Racking is a common practice among captive orcas and is a way of showing dominance by forcefully scratching at one another with their teeth. But Corky was a larger and older orca. Kandu weighed 4,600 pounds at that point, while Corky was around 7,000 pounds. Kandu lunged and tragically missed her target and hit a wall, resulting in a catastrophic injury. The impact fractured Kandu's upper jaw and severed an artery. This led to massive bleeding, including the spouting of blood from Kandu's blowhole. SeaWorld staff quickly realized the severity of the situation and asked the spectators to leave the stadium. Kandu was immediately moved to a back pool, where she was accompanied by Orchid. Despite the quick response from SeaWorld staff, Kandu's injuries were too severe to save her. They led to a massive hemorrhage, and Kandu's life was slipping away. Throughout the process, she remained by Orchid's side, unwilling to leave even in her final moments. Approximately 45 minutes after the incident, Kandu succumbed to her injuries and the loss of blood. Her passing marked a dark day in SeaWorld's history and became one of the most highly publicized incidents involving a captive killer whale. It was later revealed that this wasn't an isolated incident. Since Orchid was born, Kandu had several aggressive outbursts. These included snapping at her trainer's neck and attempting to drown another one during shows. On March 4, 1987, Kandu was filmed slamming into a trainer. She repeatedly dragged him to the bottom of the pool. For years, marine parks have argued that they provide a valuable platform for education and conservation as a form of hiding ethical issues. SeaWorld didn't ban orca performances until 2010 despite public pressure. It took 23 years and multiple accidents to finally make a change in their approach towards these animals. They have since maintained that their orcas receive world-class care because of a team of hundreds of veterinarians and care specialists. But keeping orcas in the small enclosure in marine parks compared to the ocean is not the same. However big the pool may be, they are limited. Orcas roam over 100 miles each day in the wild. Was Kandu's death due to human error? Would the tragedy be avoided if the two adults were kept in separate enclosures? Maybe another case of an orca's tragic death could give these answers. Keltie Byrne was a strong competitive swimmer, but none of her training could manage the brute force of 3 killer whales. They toyed with her and mauled her till she drowned. The terrifying trio was led by the notorious Tilikum. Poor Keltie was bruised, battered, and beaten as these 3 killer orcas viciously dragged her underwater over and over again. Keltie was heard screaming and pleading for her life until her final breath. This is the story of Keltie Byrne, the first victim of Tilikum, history's most notorious killer whale in captivity. Keltie Byrne was a good-natured girl who loved wildlife, especially marine animals. The 20-year-old biology student from the University of Victoria had decided to join the now-defunct SeaLand in British Columbia. Keltie wanted to experience working with whales while also earning some extra money to begin life as a young woman. Keltie was desperate to get up close with orcas, whom she regarded as the most impressive beasts on the planet, and working for SeaLand was her dream job. In the 90s, SeaLand of the Pacific attracted huge crowds because of the orcas. SeaLand opened in 1969 and kept several captive orcas, including their first, a female called Haida. None of the orcas took to captivity, and soon most died until SeaLand finally got the terrible trios, a male named Tilikum and two females, Noka 4 and Haida 2. The three orcas had been captured from eastern Iceland, and though they were housed together, the other two females bullied Tilikum night after night. On several occasions, he was found battered, bruised, and bleeding. What made matters worse was how the three whales were kept in metal pods just 26 feet across and 20 feet deep. Tilikum was a massive 22-foot orca, so if he stood vertical in the pod, he would stick out of the water, and yet this was their home for 14 hours a day. Besides the bruises from the fights, all three orcas would often be found with scratches and cuts from rubbing their sides against the metal pods. But that was just part of their misery. The three orcas were made to perform 7 days a week, 8 hours a day, and slowly the pressure and trauma took their toll. Tilikum was never a normal whale. Even though he hated captivity, he was strangely still a playful beast, youthful and eager to learn. Most of the trainers at SeaLand loved working with him instead of the other two. Because he was so young, Tilikum often struggled with commands, and because of this, food was denied to all three. Perhaps this is why the whales hated Tilikum and abused him, as well as showing additional signs of discontent. Nuka had already bitten one of the trainers, including a blind woman in the audience who was asked to pet her. To protect Tilikum from Nuka and Haida, SeaLand kept him in a separate pod, but being smaller, it only made matters worse. The first warnings of how Tilikum was slowly turning psychotic came from biologist Eric Walters. Walters shot off screeching letters to the Canadian Federation of Humane Societies, highlighting the safety concerns he had about the aquarium.
The issue was really that we stored these whales at night in what we call a module, and the lights were all turned out. So there's really no stimulation. They're just in this dark metal 20-foot by 30-foot pool.
Eric remarked that SeaLand was not providing the orcas with any type of new stimulation and knew that eventually these killer whales would crack. His chilling warnings gradually began taking shape as Tilikum displayed possessive behavior, grabbing anything that fell in the pod and refusing to give it up. On February 20th, 1991, the three whales seized the chance when they found Keltie Byrne had fallen into the pool. For them, it was like, oh look, the human wants to play. They were certainly not going to miss the opportunity, especially Tilikum, who went wild. Keltie Byrne was enjoying her job at SeaLand and was proving to be a diligent worker. She loved the orcas, but was still not allowed to swim or interact with them. It was the afternoon and a few shows had just finished. Keltie's job was clearing the pool when disaster struck. The audience had not left yet, and several hundred people were still in their seats watching as Keltie suddenly slipped and fell halfway into the pool. For a trainer, falling into the pool was no big deal, and halfway in is also halfway out. All she needed was to pull herself up. As Keltie gripped the sides and tried pulling herself up, she felt something forceful tugging at her body. It was Tilikum, who caught Keltie by her foot and pulled her back in. Keltie became the stimulation the whales needed, but for the trainers and other eyewitnesses, it was a dangerous development. Keltie had to be brought out immediately, or it could turn fatal. With Keltie in his mouth, Tilikum raced around the pool, dragging her underwater and surfacing again. Head trainer Steve Huxter, who witnessed the incident, remarked later, they never had a plaything in the pool that was so interactive. They just got incredibly excited and stimulated. Yes, indeed, Keltie was nothing but a live toy, and the more she thrashed around and tried to save herself, the more it excited the whales, who all joined in the fun. For Keltie, it was a nightmare. All her dreams were being dashed right before her eyes as she knew somehow this could be the end. The three whales took turns, grabbing her each time she broke free. They did not allow her to get to the side of the pool. Tilikum was the most violent, yet in terms of whale speak, this was just horsing around and nothing more. After all, this would be the standard way of playing with prey in a pod of whales, especially large seals, and there was Keltie, a struggling human. Co-trainer Karen McGee, standing on the side of the pool with other trainers, watched in horror as Tilikum battered Keltie. As he rose above the water surface with her, she saw Keltie wave frantically, screaming her name, saying, "Help me, I don't want to die." At this point, Karen threw a life ring out to Keltie, who tried grabbing it, but Tilikum would not let her. Several trainers began clanging buckets and throwing fish in the water to distract the whales, but nothing worked. Tilikum was having the time of his life. All the bullying, the pent-up frustration, and the trauma was now erupting in a moment of frenzied and violent playfulness. A large net was thrown in to try and separate Keltie from the whales. Still, it possibly backfired, causing the whales to remain underwater longer, a deadly development for Keltie's survival. The other trainers began leaning over the side of the pool and saw how the three whales bounced Keltie around underwater. She was being rammed against the sides, a sure sign that her bones were fractured. The poor woman was being killed slowly and painfully. When Tilikum rose one final time with Keltie, she was still conscious. She screamed one last time for help and then disappeared underwater again. This time, she couldn't hold out any longer. In the next few moments, Keltie died. The coroner termed it forceful drowning. Eventually, after 2 hours of being bored with a dead plaything, Tilikum let Keltie go. When Keltie's body was recovered from the pool with the help of a net, she looked terrible. Her injuries were horrendous. Keltie suffered several fractures, punctured organs, and lacerations across her body. It was truly a sad day, and ironically, one could not blame the animals for their actions. Speaking to reporters, SeaWorld manager Alejandro Bolt reported she had 10 tooth marks on her body, the largest on her left thigh, but otherwise untouched. The whales had stripped her clothes off. It was just a tragic accident. In stark contrast to what the eyewitness reports had stated, SeaWorld downplayed the incident and released an official report. The incident shocked many and enraged animal activists worldwide, commenting on how the deplorable conditions and mismanagement of such large beasts in captivity were responsible for their gruesome behavior. Keltie's death, however, triggered a moment that finally led to the closure of SeaWorld of the Pacific. Yet it did not lead to the freeing of the whales. SeaWorld of Orlando seized the opportunity and purchased Tilikum to protect the whale. The water park in Orlando gave Tilikum another platform to kill again, and he repeated the feat 2 more times. Although Tilikum died years later from disease, he would go down as the most famous orca whale in marine park history, and the only whale to have caused the deaths of multiple people. Keltie Byrne, Daniel Duke, and another trainer, Brancheau. The murder of Brancheau was far more disturbing than what had happened to Keltie. It made sensational news and finally led to governments cracking down on breeding orcas in captivity. Today, the debate rages on whether marine parks like SeaWorld should be allowed to use orcas as performing animals. Like SeaLand in the Pacific, SeaWorld has always chosen to keep a tight lid against controversies. Even the incident concerning Brancheau was attributed to only drowning. Should children today be educated on why such entertainment is wrong for humans and animals? Perhaps with awareness, more and more people will stop witnessing such shows. But until that time comes, places like SeaWorld will continue using orcas despite the controversy. But Keltie Byrne was simply the first of Tilikum's victims. Everyone remembers that intense emotional scene when Willie the Orca made his final jump to freedom in the 1993 movie Free Willy. However, the applause and excitement soon turned to horror when fans worldwide discovered how the real Willie, aka Keiko the killer whale, was living in captivity. Keiko lived in a tank so shallow, his tail almost reached the bottom. Keiko's plight touched the hearts of millions, who soon unleashed an outcry, bombarding his captors for release. Keiko's story is endearing. Although it may have ended with his freedom, Keiko would never enjoy it as a free killer whale should have. This is the tragic story of Keiko, the super orca that we all know as Willie. Keiko was captured when he was just a toddler. He was born in the wild off the coast of Iceland around September 24, 1976. Unfortunately, in 1979, he ended up in a theme park in Iceland when he was only 3 years old. A whaler named Joe Gunnison, the leader of the whaling company, attacked Keiko's entire family. The so-called theme park he was kept in, which is a tiny aquarium near a small town in Iceland with a population of just over 1,000 people. At that time, he was given the name Segi and was later known as Keiko. His journey into captivity had begun, and for years, Keiko performed in shows, doing tricks and entertaining audiences. But he was far from home, and many people began to question whether keeping a creature in captivity was the right thing to do. Later in 1982, Keiko was sold and moved to Marineland in Ontario, Canada. It was here that he started performing for larger audiences, but it was also where signs of his poor health began to emerge. He developed skin lesions, likely due to the stress of captivity, and had a tough time fitting in with the older female orcas in the facility. This was due to not being part of their pod from the beginning. He was very scared and kept to himself, causing constant attacks by the other orcas. Marineland couldn't fix the situation, so in 1985 he was sold to Reno Aventura in Mexico City, Mexico. It was at this point that he received the name Keiko, the lucky one. At the time, he was only 10 feet long and was housed in a tank intended for bottlenose dolphins, but he wasn't a baby anymore and just kept growing. His living conditions were far from ideal. He grew to 21 feet in length and the tank barely held him. It was only 65 feet wide and 22 feet deep. Keiko could barely move, let alone swim around. And to make matters worse, he was sharing the tank with some dolphins, but at least he had company. The bigger problem than the size of the tank and his friends was the chlorine in the tank and the fact that it was always 80 degrees. Much warmer water than orcas should live in, and large amounts of chlorine meant they were saving money on refilling the tanks by just dumping chemicals in them. They would also put salt in the water instead of bringing natural seawater, which even worsened his skin condition. But that didn't stop the Reno Aventura owners from forcing Keiko to perform up to 5 times a day. He was basically just a money printer for them and a marketing stunt. He was exhausted and in poor health, but his mind was so broken that he never tried to be aggressive. Keiko was a gentle soul, and these conditions slowly exhausted him both physically and mentally. Captive killer whales tend to be aggressive and either rebel or simply fight with each other. But Keiko was silent and never rewarded for his outstanding behavior. He obeyed commands, acted cooperatively, and got along with his dolphin friends, and even started to learn how to communicate with them. His caretaker's baby once fell into Keiko's tank, and this is when he showed his amazing personality. Most other orcas would play with the child aggressively or simply chomp on it, but Keiko helped the baby up and put him on the surface even before anyone noticed the baby was missing. This incident made worldwide news, and Keiko's life was forever changed in 1993 when he became the star of the film Free Willy. This movie captured the hearts of many and highlighted the bond between a young boy named Jesse and the orca known as Willy. Jesse is trying to save Willy from an amusement park that just wants to dump him. The incident with the baby in Reno Aventura also became a scene in the movie. The movie was an international hit and smashed the box office. The success drew attention to Keiko's real situation and raised questions about the ethics of keeping an orca in captivity. And the public put a lot of pressure, with over 300,000 people demanding the immediate release of Keiko.
300,000 phone calls. People called from all over the world wanting to get involved with efforts to save the world's whales.
His living conditions and health problems were highlighted because of the movie. He was far from the joyful orca from the movie. Keiko was severely overweight. His skin lesions had gotten way worse and spread all over his body. He developed even more skin warts and stomach ulcers. The damage to his immune system caused him to become severely underweight, slow, and unable to perform. The projected cost for his freedom was insanely high, and the park got only $75,000 for his role in the movie and refused to use the money for Keiko. This all led to a collaborative effort between Warner Brothers and the International Marine Mammal Project. In February 1995, the Free Willy Keiko Foundation was established. Donations from the foundation, 2 generous benefactors, Greg and Wendy McCall, along with contributions from millions of school children, raised over $7 million. The McCalls themselves donated $2 million. This funding was crucial for Keiko's rehabilitation and potential return to the wild. On January 8, 1996, Keiko's life took a major step towards freedom. He was flown from Mexico to the Oregon Coast Aquarium in Newport, Oregon. There he was placed in a new concrete enclosure containing seawater. This was the first time Keiko was living in bearable conditions. He stayed there to recuperate for 8 months, and his weight increased significantly during this time, reaching 9,620 pounds by June of 1997. The plan to return Keiko to the wild sparked both hope and controversy. Some believed that the years in captivity made the idea of releasing him unrealistic, and that he would never adapt to the wild. However, preparations to reintroduce him began on September 9, 1998. Keiko was flown to Kleitvik, a bay on the island of Heimaey in Iceland, in a specialized container filled with salt water and cooled with ice cubes. Under the care of the Free Willy Keiko Foundation, and with assistance from the Ocean Future Society, Keiko began the training to prepare for his life in the open ocean. He had to become way stronger as he never swam long distances, and supervised swims in the open ocean were a part of his preparation. He had a whole facility dedicated to his training and released into the open waters. After 17 years of slavery, the killer whale was finally close to its homeland. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived in the summer of 2002. Keiko was released into the open ocean off the coast of Iceland. It was a historic event as he became the first captive orca to be returned to the wild. He initially began swimming freely in the Icelandic waters and was spotted in the bay for days. However, Keiko's transition to a complete wildlife was not without its challenges. He continued to receive support from his caretakers, including food supplements, as he adjusted to hunting for his own meals. He also had a satellite transmitter attached to monitor his progress and location. In the following years, he was closely monitored and led on walks where he would interact with other orcas, and slowly but surely, he began to become a part of the pod and swim with other orcas for longer periods of time. But Keiko still stayed close to the bay and its people. Sadly, Keiko was alone and looked for company with the people because he kept the love towards them. This is why he would often approach both children and adults and allow them to pet him. Although he occasionally approached groups of wild orcas, he remained on the periphery and did not integrate with them. Because he often sought out the company of humans instead of his own kind, people started raising concerns about his ability to adapt to life in the wild. As Keiko kept refusing to leave the bay and kept interacting with people, the authorities banned all interactions with him except for his caretakers. On December 12, 2003, Keiko was swimming in Taknes Bay in Norway, where he succumbed to pneumonia at the age of 27 and died alone. His passing marked the conclusion of a complex journey that aimed to give him a second chance at life in the wild, but it was too late, as all 17 years in captivity, he was no longer a wild animal. The project to free Keiko was met with mixed results and opinions. While some considered it a success, others believed it fell short of its goals. Keiko's hard time to fully adapt to life in the wild raised questions about the challenges of reintroducing captive animals to their natural habitats. Some think that a better alternative to freeing animals that were held captive for a long time is making some sort of sanctuary where their quality of life would improve, but that these animals could never adapt to living in the wild. Was Keiko's story an entirely successful one? We have our thoughts reserved, but maybe another orca's tale could yield an answer. Freedom for a killer whale in captivity is among the sweetest gifts in the world. That's what Lolita sensed when she retired from performing at the Seaquarium in Miami. The world's oldest captive orca lived for 57 years in a small tank at Seaquarium, but now the world wanted her freed. For some years now, Lolita has been miserable. She had lost her mate, her beloved Hugo, and with him no more, Lolita was hanging on the edge. She had no children and could no longer come to term. But suddenly, in 2022, it was decided that Lolita had earned her freedom. She was to be transferred to a massive whale sanctuary. But that day would never come, and Lolita would never see the open ocean again. In August of 2023, the alien orca passed away. This is the story of Lolita, a dark tale of an elderly orca who lived to be among the loneliest in captivity. It all goes back to 1967, to the beautiful waters of Puget Sound, where Lolita and her mother lived as resident whales. Puget Sound might look like an ocean paradise, but it was also the happy hunting grounds of the orca boogeyman, Ted Griffin. Griffin was a notorious poacher, skilled in capturing and selling juvenile orcas to aquariums in Europe and the US. Lolita was only 6 years old when Griffin and his team captured her, along with several other juvenile whales after Griffin herded them into Pen Cove, Whidbey Island. Whale captures are bloody affairs, often ending in the death of orcas, especially the mothers fighting to protect their babies. Lolita's capture was no better. Using speedboats and bombs like M80, Griffin's team surrounded the whales with nets. It was a violent capture with some orcas fighting to resist. Eventually, 4 juveniles and 1 adult were killed in a melee. 80 orcas were captured that day in an operation called Namu Incorporated. Lolita was one of them. The gruesome incident stirred many animal activists, especially when 3 of the carcasses washed up on the shore of Whidbey Island on November 18, 1970. A legal suit against SeaWorld 6 years later ended in a settlement, and the company agreed to never again capture orcas in Washington state to avoid publicly taking the blame. Lolita wasn't her original name at the time. She was first named Toki, and she was quite large for her size. For Griffin, that meant loads of cash. At 14 feet long, Lolita was perfect for the regular-sized tanks in a marine park. On September 24, 1970, Lolita was sold to Seaquarium veterinarian Jesse White for a whopping $20,000 and was sent to Seaquarium Miami, where she met Hugo for the first time. Hugo was a giant boarding orca bull who wasn't doing well, so Seaquarium thought a mate would do him some good. Lolita's story is intertwined with Hugo's because both got on well together, a reprieve and distraction from their living hell. Hugo's story was no less tragic than Lolita's. Captured in 1968 in equally violent circumstances, Hugo was packed off to the Seaquarium, where he lived in a pen a little bigger than himself. When Lolita arrived, she was half the size of Hugo, who measured 22 feet long and weighed 12,000 pounds. Hugo detested his captivity and often rebelled against trainers and refused food, frequently showed aggression, and often tried to harm himself by bashing his head against the wall of the tank. In 1980, Hugo succumbed to self-inflicted torture and created headlines as an orca who took his own life. If at all Hugo lived in brief happiness, it was because of the bond he shared with Lolita. When 2 orcas from different pods meet, they may not always become friends. There was a risk that Lolita might get aggressive against Hugo, so she was housed in a separate tank adjacent to him. Seaquarium felt it was better for the 2 to get acquainted at first, and they weren't exactly pinning their hopes on the 2 bonding. Lolita lived in the whale bowl, a tank that measured 80 feet by 35 feet and 20 feet deep. But now it would suffice for Lolita, but once she grew to her full length, the whale bowl would turn into more of a sardine can for her. It was a huge surprise when Lolita and Hugo began bonding within a few days. Soon, trainers began hearing wails and sounds, a sign that the 2 orcas were communicating. Both Lolita and Hugo began calling out to each other every night, perhaps from a perspective of solidarity. Somehow, the orcas might have just realized how they were in the same predicament and were consoling each other. One reminded the other of their family and friends free in the ocean. For the next 10 years, Hugo and Lolita became the best of friends. In fact, Lolita might have just been the solace that a depressive Hugo needed. The duo trained together and even performed together. But to say they were happy would not be entirely accurate. After all, both were in a prison. They were far away from the sights and sounds of the ocean, and if you think they enjoyed their performances, you have another thing coming. You see, performing orcas have no option but to obey the cues and commands of a trainer during a performance. They've been trained to do so, and not always is the training ideal for a monstrous-sized animal like a killer whale. Hugo had lived in Seaquarium much before Lolita, so he turned out to be a depressive, suicidal animal. When Lolita arrived, the first few weeks may not have been so bad. With Hugo by her side, she might have thought, okay, let's get used to it. I have a friend. It would be all right. Until, of course, training began. Training a large killer whale goes one of 2 ways: obey and get rewarded, or disobey and get punished. An uncooperative killer whale was often prodded and deprived of food. Punishments sometimes extend to depriving an entire team of orcas for the fault of one. This bizarre method would result in the battering and bullying of the guilty orca, but it was a guilty form of coercion that marine parks used all the time. While Hugo remained rebellious, Lolita proved more cooperative. Perhaps it was the presence of Hugo that helped Lolita forget about her depression. In fact, she might have even looked forward to performing with Hugo. The thought of jumping out of the water, swimming at high speeds, and performing tricks might have given a brief reprieve to her captivity. It might have even forget that she was in a tank, but instead, in the ocean with her mate by her side. Lolita was considered a courageous and gentle animal. She even showered affection on some of her trainers and throughout her existence, did not even once attack a human. The same cannot be said for other famous killer whales in captivity. Hugo, Tilikum, and Kasatka are names that will go down in history as examples of why such magnificent beasts belong in the ocean. In his lifetime, Tilikum killed 3 people, and Kasatka had attacked many. No, it was never their fault. The same could not be said for Lolita. She was the sweetest and often showed affection to humans. On March 3, 1980, Lolita's Hugo was no more. The orca's constant self-battering finally took its toll, and he finally succumbed to a major brain aneurysm. Experts attributed his behavior to suicidal psychosis, often seen in captive whales. The death of Hugo made several animal rights groups, including PETA, sit up and take notice. Hugo's demise gave birth to the rise of Friends of Lolita. The movement was born and kept up its momentum for 3 decades. Lolita just had to be freed. With her precious Hugo gone, Lolita sank into a depression. Her trainers noticed a marked change in her behavior. It seemed the future was bright for Lolita and her release was imminent. The Dolphin Company would even issue a written undertaking to the Friends of Toki. Lolita would relocate to an ocean sanctuary in her native waters of the Pacific Northwest, where she would receive human care. Lolita had lived too many years in captivity, and experts warned that should she ever be released into the open ocean, it would be detrimental to her survival. She had grown too dependent on humans, and ironically, her sweet and gentle nature would work against her total release. Lolita was the oldest living orca in captivity, and her longevity was attributed to her cooperative and friendly nature. Lolita's freedom was not to be an immediate one. An agreement was drawn up between the Dolphin Company and Friends of Toki in March of 2023, planning Lolita's eventual release in early 2024. Till then, she would remain a retired orca in the aquarium, but that turned out to be a big mistake. In August 2023, Lolita developed a renal condition and began showing signs of serious discomfort. She stopped responding to medication, stopped eating, and looked grievous. On August 18, 2023, the Dolphin Company revealed Lolita passed away. No further details were divulged about her death. The Dolphin Company closed the aquarium for a day to mourn her loss. For the Friends of Toki, and for those who fought for years for Lolita's release, the news of her death was devastating. PETA called it unforgivable. In a thread on X, the organization wrote, "Her story will forever remind us of the urgent need to protect our oceans and the magnificent creatures that call them home." While destiny prevented Lolita from experiencing the waters of her home again, her death did not go in vain. It paved the way for bringing attention to the ethical concerns about captivity. Shouldn't Lolita's release have been sooner? Perhaps it was. The beautiful and gentle orca might have passed away in an environment she could have called home. But let's take a look at her friend in the tank. When Shamu first debuted in SeaWorld, it was a show unlike anything that people had ever seen. A killer whale performing tricks, riding with trainers on its back, it was marvelous. The marine park had turned out to be a paradise of entertainment until one tragic day in 1971, when the ugly face of captivity revealed itself and Shamu attacked. Crowds watched in horror as the 9-year-old orca threw a young Alexis off her back, then gnashed down on her leg for the kill. The star of the show had suddenly gone berserk, leaving everyone with a first-hand glimpse of a killer whale in relentless frustration. Anna was rescued just in time. Behind the paradise of entertainment lies a sordid tale of a beautiful beast of nature and its life cut short only to please humans. This is an endearing story of the life of Shamu, the first performing orca of SeaWorld. For decades, the SeaWorld franchise has wowed crowds in Texas, Florida, and California, with their star attraction being the Orca shows. The killer whales were projected as educational and awesome entertainment for families. So successful, in fact, that the name Shamu turned into a brand and a money-making machine. Yet the main character at the center of it all was always an unwilling participant. An orca who was wrenched cruelly from its home in the ocean to live in a nightmare entertaining humans. It all goes back to a sunny October day in 1965. Ted Griffin was about to set off a mission he enjoyed the most, capturing baby orcas. Griffin had caught a few before, and the sight of seeing a juvenile writhe and thrash in a net while its mother lay bleeding was a thrill like no other for him. Shamu would often roam the waters of Penn Cove Puget Sound off Washington, and like every other day, she was with her mother. Griffin spotted the whales and seized his chance. The killer whale was no match for a seasoned whale hunter, and soon, Shamu found herself in a horrifying situation. These humans were hurling the sharpest weapons at her mother, who kept trying to protect her baby. There was very little that Shamu's mother could do except succumb to her grievous injuries. The large killer whale sank like a stone, leaving her baby at the mercy of a delighted Griffin. It was the beginning of a never-ending nightmare for Shamu. It may come as a surprise, but SeaWorld was never intended as a home for Shamu. SeaWorld did not even have performing orcas at the time of her capture. It was all a grand plan for the notorious Ted Griffin to make a mate for Namu, a male orca, which he kept at his Seattle Marine Aquarium. Namu was a massive 6.5-meter bull sold to Griffin for $8,000, who showcased the orca as his most prized exhibit in an open pen at Warriors Cove, part of his Seattle Marine Aquarium. Unfortunately, Namu displayed signs of unfathomable stress, often emitting terrifying screams the entire night. Griffin decided that a female mate might just calm him down, and that mate turned out to be Shamu. From the vast expanse of the ocean, Shamu found herself suddenly thrust into a small 3-sided pen, about 12 by 18 meters and 6 meters deep, kept afloat by empty oil drums. Even worse was how she had a stranger for company. She was not used to being around males because she was still young and always roamed alongside her mother. Shamu missed her mother often, crying and wailing just like Namu. What made things worse was how the pen bordered the open ocean. The appearance of free whales who frequently visited in solidarity with their captured mates only made things worse. Shamu rejected Namu from the start. He was not going to share a small space with a huge male and often fought with him. Griffin's master plan for future breeding was dashed. Realizing his mistake, he sold Shamu to SeaWorld San Diego, and a new era in marine entertainment was born. SeaWorld, the brand new attraction at Rock, California, was promoted as a marine lover's paradise. Founded in 1964, it encompassed all 22 acres along the shores of Mission Bay and became a resounding success within a few days of its inauguration. The appearance of Shamu at SeaWorld skyrocketed the popularity of the marine entertainment company. Seeing small sharks, large turtles, and performing dolphins was one thing, but seeing a giant orca up close was a mind-blowing experience for many, except Shamu. From Griffin's hellhole to SeaWorld, it was like jumping from the frying pan into the fire for Shamu. Her living space at SeaWorld was no better than the pen at Warriors Cove. This was just as small and as claustrophobic. Shamu had now grown to 1,700 feet long, yet the tank she was housed in was just 20 feet by 30 feet. If Shamu stood vertically in the pool, the water would never cover her entire body. It was solitary confinement of the worst kind. From an unwilling mate to a male orca to a performing one at SeaWorld, Shamu's transition was not an easy one. SeaWorld was a completely alien environment. While she loved the water, she loved the feel of being able to swim, roll, and jump in a performing tank larger than hers. She was often puzzled why the humans poked, prodded, and forced her to do things she never wanted to. She didn't know how. Training to interact and perform stunts with humans was a nightmare for Shamu. She was scolded if she didn't oblige. She was starved and soon learned to associate cooperation with food. SeaWorld was ecstatic. Shamu became a celebrity. She was featured on billboards, the subject of TV shows, and of course, the crowds. How the groups loved her, and each time she surfaced out of the water with a human standing on the tip of her nose. The group would go berserk and echo and chant, "Shamu, Shamu." Everyone was happy. SeaWorld was raking in millions, but everything was not right with Shamu. She was falling into depression. SeaWorld was oblivious to the mental and physical harm to the orca. Instead, the standalone marine parks soon opened more franchises in Orlando, Florida, Ohio, and San Antonio, Texas. More parks meant a demand for more orcas, and soon, several more juveniles were captured by men like Griffin and sold to SeaWorld. Shamu performed at SeaWorld for 6 years, but all was not right with the female orca. She was just 9 years old, but already showing signs of distress. SeaWorld shrugged off all concerns, attributing Shamu's actions as normal stress. They failed to recognize how Shamu was reaching a breaking point, and desperation would soon turn to an attack. On April 19, 1971, Gail McLaughlin, SeaWorld's public relations director, and Kent Burgess asked SeaWorld's secretary, 22-year-old Anna Eckes, if she wanted to ride Shamu. They thought it would be an incredible publicity stunt, showing off how safe killer whale shows could be. McLaughlin and Burgess were naive and had no idea such actions could go wrong. Captive killer whales may be trained and obedient, but one thing not taken into consideration is their unpredictability. Moreover, such wild creatures view only trainers as masters, and their cooperation and loyalty are only directed at such individuals. Making them interact with a stranger is just asking for trouble, but it was arranged, and unsuspecting and excited Anna happily agreed. Anna was no novice to water. She was a trained scuba diver and an excellent swimmer, but interacting up close with a killer whale is an entirely different ballgame. Anna was warned before the stunt that it was a risk. Things could go wrong and she could fall off, but not in her wildest dreams did she envision an attack. Anna changed into a diving suit and got into the water with Shamu. Everything appeared normal. Anna followed all her cues and Shamu seemed to cooperate. Soon, Anna got onto the orca's back and raised her hand, smiled and waved to the crowd. As Shamu began swimming towards the deep end of the pool, disaster struck. One swift stroke, Shamu tossed Anna off, launching her into the water. Driven by instinct, years of depression and trauma, Shamu unleashed her rage on Anna. With her enormous teeth, Shamu grabbed the girl's leg and clamped down. Anna was trapped, and Shamu refused to let go. Anna screamed. She was in shock and could not believe what was happening. Why would Shamu attack her? If Shamu was not closer to the pool's edge, it might have been a terrifying tragedy for SeaWorld. Nonetheless, all the excitement and joy soon turned into horror as the crowd watched the star orca drag Anna Eckes around in her mouth. Fortunately, other trainers sprung into action in attempts to distract the killer whale. By now, the water was turning red with the blood from Anna's ankle. Shamu's teeth were embedded in her flesh and clamped shut like a vice. Soon, one of the trainers had the idea of driving the pool into the orca's mouth, forcibly prying her jaw open. The tactic worked, allowing Anna to break free. Anna was then taken to safety as Shamu swam around in circles in her pool, oblivious to what she had done. The crowd was all shocked and silent, and the terror turned into some iconic reprieve for Shamu. Her performing days were over.
I was so afraid I was going to drown, and because she would dive and go down, and I didn't know how long she would, be down there.
As for Anna Eckes, the girl suffered a horrible deep gash that required 100 stitches. In the same year, Anna sued SeaWorld for fraud, negligence, and liability for an animal with vicious or dangerous propensities. She was awarded $17,500 in damages, and SeaWorld's appeals for a non-suit and a new trial were denied. Even though Shamu was retired from performing, her life was worse than ever. The stimulation of performing was denied. She was made to live in her puny little tank, and the trauma took its toll. By the end of 1971, Shamu contracted a severe uterine infection, which did not respond to treatment. Too fragile and ill, she died of septicemia and was just 9 years old. In contrast, a free orca in the ocean can live to almost 90 years old, the average being 80. Shamu's death did not mark the end of SeaWorld shows. The marine park has tasted billions and will never pass that up. A new orca, Helena, the first to be born and survive in captivity, adored the mantle of Shamu and the show continued. Was it right of SeaWorld to establish a live performing band that involved the suffering and captivity of a beautiful animal? We have our thoughts reserved, but maybe another orca's tale could give the answer. An aquatic celebrity who attracted thousands of admirers from all over the US suddenly ends his own life, leaving everyone in shock. The death of Hugo, the killer orca, is one of many incidents that highlights the psychological torture mammals face in captivity and how their suffering is glorified in the aquarium industry. But who was Hugo, the killer orca, and what were the reasons that led to him ending his own life? It was the year 1965 when Hugo, a majestic southern resident killer whale, took his very first breath in the vast and mysterious ocean. Just like his family, Hugo spent his days gracefully traversing the waters, skillfully hunting for food alongside his devoted family. But little did he know, his life was about to take a devastating turn. Fast forward to 1968, Hugo's world was shattered. In Vaughan Bay, Washington, his days of freedom came to a heart-wrenching end. He was captured, torn away from everything he had ever known. Imagine being only 3 years old and being forcibly separated from your loved ones, transported over 3,000 miles away to a place unknown. That was Hugo's tragic reality. The aquarium in Florida became his new home, a concrete prison they called the Celebrity Bowl. In this confined space, Hugo's magnificent body was trapped, only a fraction of his immense size able to be submerged in the water. Isolated from the outside world, he became nothing more than a spectacle, a mere source of profit for the aquarium. However, amidst the bleakness, there was one man who refused to accept this mistreatment. Richard O'Berry, a former trainer of Hugo, witnessed the pitiful scene firsthand. In his book, Behind the Dolphin's Smile, O'Berry vividly describes the heartache. When I fed Hugo, his tail would be lying on the bottom and his head would be completely out of the water. It was pathetic. They wanted me to train him. I refused and left in disgust. Yet, in the midst of Hugo's despair, fate had another twist in store. A glimmer of hope emerged in the form of a new companion named Lolita. Like Hugo, she too had suffered a tragic fate, losing all of her family members to ruthless hunters. And so her path led her to this aquarium, where she found herself sharing the same stage as Hugo. But their initial introduction wasn't immediate. Kept in separate tanks to prevent any potential conflicts, the two orcas called out to each other during the lonely nights, yearning for connection. Their sorrowful cries echoed throughout the walls, an undeniable testament to their longing for companionship. Recognizing the undeniable bond between these two remarkable creatures, the aquarium's managers made a bold decision. They reunited Hugo and Lolita in a new tank, hoping for a positive outcome, and to everyone's amazement, the two orcas thrived together. It was a fresh start for Hugo, a chance to rediscover happiness and find solace in the companionship that he so desperately craved. Hugo and Lolita quickly became the stars of this aquarium. Their awe-inspiring performances captivated the hearts of thousands who flocked from far and wide to witness their magnificent displays. Television ads showcased their incredible bond, enticing people to experience their beauty firsthand. Yet, behind the gleeful images projected in those advertisements, a heartbreaking reality lurked beneath the surface. The whales, despite the smiles they wore for the audience, were suffering. Their lives offstage were consumed by misery, hidden behind a facade of entertainment. As time went on, more and more spectators came to witness the amazing orcas and their performances. But things weren't looking so good for Hugo, as the longer he stayed in captivity, the quicker his sanity degraded. Hugo began developing a habit of ramming his head against the tank walls, which seemed like a quirky habit for outsiders, but was actually an indication of Hugo's patience running out. As days went by, Hugo started to lose control over his impulses and began to act violently towards the trainers of this aquarium. In 1970, during a rehearsal, a trainer stuck his head inside Hugo's mouth, which was already a bad idea. But to his surprise, Hugo bit down and lethally injured him, which resulted in the trainer getting 10 stitches in his head and neck. Just like his behavior, Hugo's aggressive habits became volatile as well. In 1971, an incident occurred where Hugo broke a hole in the plastic window of his Orca tank and severed the tip of his nose. It was concluded that the incident occurred due to Hugo's habit of ramming his head against the tank walls. Hugo was taken to a vet and his skin piece was reattached, but within a week it came off. As a result, Hugo bore a permanent small depression on the tip of his nose that he would have for the remainder of his lifetime. As years went by, Hugo's self-destructive behaviors kept on growing, as in 1972, a aquarium trainer, Max Jacks, reported that Hugo had caused harm to many people by forcibly bumping into them with his head whenever he became irritated. Several other trainers also attested to Hugo's tendency to behave aggressively and initiate attacks against the aquarium staff members. One unfortunate individual even sustained a permanent scar on their arm as a result of an encounter with the whale. It seemed like Lolita's presence could not prevent Hugo from losing his sanity and harming others. Even though Hugo showed clear signs of hostility towards the staff of this aquarium, they were not going to let him go that easily, as he and Lolita were the stars of the show that brought in thousands of dollars weekly, making management wealthy beyond their wildest dreams, but their greed sacrificed the health of their animals as Hugo's sanity was lost with time. The animals that were once meant to explore the open seas were now being held captive for their entire lives inside a concrete pool for others' entertainment. It was a fate worse than death, and soon it would lead to the demise of poor young Hugo. Soon, tragedy was going to strike faster than anyone could have imagined, as Hugo's self-destructive behavior was soon going to decide his fate. At the beginning of 1980, Hugo was acting sluggishly and began facing fatigue, but no medical examination took place as an animal's health was not a priority back then. Even in his suffering, he was not being noticed by the staff. According to them, Hugo was looking fine and healthy. They carried on with his usual training routines, but this carelessness from the staff would eventually result in lethal consequences. Soon, the adored star of this aquarium was going to make headlines for all the wrong reasons, as years of self-destructive behavior finally caught up to young Hugo, eventually leading him towards his death. On March 4th, 1980, Hugo and Lolita were rehearsing their stunts for an opening event on the same day, but it seemed like the curtain for Hugo was closing even before he could become part of the spotlight. Hugo stopped moving completely and floated above the water like a wooden plank for quite some time. The trainers called out to Hugo multiple times to move and even threw bait towards his way to get a reaction. They thought Hugo must have gone under a half-brained sleep, but even after multiple tries they could get no response from him. Upon closer inspection, they realized that the young orca had passed away. Many that came to make joyful memories were welcomed with sadness, as hundreds of spectators saw the lifeless body of the beloved star being hoisted out of his tank. Hugo's death left everyone in shock, but unlike everyone else, the aquarium resumed the show as if nothing had happened. During an autopsy, it was revealed that Hugo died due to brain aneurysm. For some, it was proof that Hugo's death was due to his habit of thrashing against the tank walls. Following his passing, Hugo's body was discreetly disposed of at an undisclosed location. Many claimed that the management of the aquarium dumped Hugo's body in a local landfill, but these were mere speculations made by people enraged at the management's mistreatment of the animal. After Hugo's death, everything went back to normal, and the show carried on without him. Lolita would later do all the performances by herself, entertaining crowds of hundreds that had no idea what the orca was actually feeling deep down inside. For Lolita, Hugo was the only friend she had since her captivity. With him gone, she was once again alone, swimming in circles in a concrete pool with no freedom in sight. Hugo wasn't the only whale to show hostility towards his captors. Throughout the 1960s and 1990s, there have been many incidents of captive killer whales attacking aquarium staff members from all over the globe, and even killing some in the process. For instance, killer whales like Lolita, Tilikum, and Cuddles all showed a familiar pattern of aggression and rebellion against people while being in captivity. As the trend towards aquarium kept on increasing over the years, so did reports of captive orcas attacking, creating a debate among activists about whether or not these behaviors are a result of orcas fighting for their freedom. Rebellious orcas aren't the only issue here, as there have been many reports of young orcas dying due to multiple reasons. but the majority of the cases point towards the lack of facilities that the aquariums had. Many activists have highlighted the fact that aquariums collect aquatic life in large quantities without even assessing their capabilities first. During a USDA audit conducted in 2017, it was discovered that the tank housing Lolita failed to meet the size criteria mandated by federal law, which validated the activists' criticism. By looking into the history of Hugo and Lolita, we wonder, will this aquarium ever be held accountable for the mistreatment of animals such as Hugo? Will animals like Lolita ever get the freedom they deserve? We may never know, but remember that there were other orcas that also suffered the same way that Hugo did. Daniel Dukes must have regretted his crazy stunt when he was pulled down by his scrotum into the tank of one of the most notorious killer whales in history. As a petty drug abuser and trespasser, Dukes was known for doing crazy things in life. The man who appeared deranged to witnesses thought he could break into SeaWorld, swim with an orca, and escape. What he didn't bargain for was Tilikum, the beloved orca, that slaughtered him in such a vicious and painstaking way. The monster whale attacked him violently when Dukes jumped into the pool. Dukes was battered and thrashed around the pool, bitten and bruised. At one point, Tilikum caught hold of his scrotum and dragged him down. When he drowned, the whale tore it off completely. When they found his body, Dukes was left totally unrecognizable. What possessed Daniel Dukes to trespass in the SeaWorld is anybody's guess. Eyewitnesses reported Dukes mumbling to himself while hanging around the entrance to SeaWorld. This was one last break-in that finally got the better of him. Dukes was a troubled man with a history of drug abuse. One particular report in the Orlando Sentinel described Dukes as a marijuana-smoking drifter from South Carolina with a string of petty arrests. While he wasn't considered violent, most arrests included drug possession, petty theft, and trespassing. Dukes didn't fit in with society and was regarded as having several issues. He was also prone to impulsive behavior and was reported to be obsessed with the game Ultima. In March of 1996, he even broke into the home of the game's creator, Richard Garriott, who fired a gun at Dukes as a warning. Instead of being scared, Dukes walked up to Garriott's bedroom, stripped himself, and tucked himself into Garriott's bed. It was there that police arrested him when they responded to a 911 call from Garriott. His neighbors described him as a gentle person who loved nature. One priest of a Hare Krishna temple near Dukes' home claimed he often fed homeless people and loved feeding wild birds. One woman named Susan wrote online that Dukes was a clean-cut, happy-go-lucky kid who had a great sense of humor. He was a good student and her friend. From the mixed responses, it was clear that Dukes had two very different personalities. Sadly, one got the better of him the day he decided to break into SeaWorld. On July 6, 1999, Dukes was seen hanging around the gates of SeaWorld, where eyewitnesses said he looked dirty. He was talking to himself and reeked of a foul odor. Just a few days before he was seen at SeaWorld, Dukes had spent 3 days in jail for stealing a Three Musketeers bar. Some of the witnesses who provided sworn testimonies said Dukes' attire was questionable, while others said he was wandering around the front gate plaza, glaring suspiciously at young girls. The eyewitnesses' statements proved that Dukes was not in a clear frame of mind. His urge to break into an establishment was too much. He just had to do it. Dukes managed to get into the marine park and stripped. He had swimming shorts beneath his trousers, which suggests he had planned his reckless stunt all along. Unfortunately, though, he chose to dive into the tank of the most notorious killer whale in the history of marine entertainment. Dukes was unaware of Tilikum, the killer whale, who showed no mercy when he wanted to kill. Tilikum was an 11-ton orca whose 22-foot frame made him look like a monster in his tank. He was a tragic victim of circumstance, a whale who never took kindly to captivity. The killer whale was captured back in 1983 in Iceland and was brought to SeaWorld in Orlando in 1992. Tilikum's transition from the vast expanse of the ocean to living in a tank was a nightmare. His training was fraught with incidents of rebellion, inviting the wrath of other orcas who repeatedly beat him up. Tilikum's frustration and pent-up rage exploded when he killed his first victim, female trainer Keltie Byrne, in 1991. On July 6, 1999, Tilikum was probably pacing around in his pool. It had been 13 years since its capture, yet he could not get used to being docile in his tin can of a home. Trainers were extremely careful with Tilikum. They knew the orca had tasted blood once, and there was no way of knowing if he would ever go berserk again. Yet, Daniel Dukes unknowingly gave him a chance to prove what a killer Tilikum could be. Whether the security cameras captured the incident is unknown, but Dukes waited for the crowd to disperse. As soon as it grew dark, he broke into the marine park and made a straight beeline for the orca tank. In his mind, he was living out one more escapade, another adventure. He could get caught or he might not. He didn't realize that this would be the last break-in of his entire life. As soon as Dukes jumped into Tilikum's tank, he may have yelled. Who wouldn't? After all, the water in the tank was a chilly 50 degrees and icy cold. Sensing the sudden movement in the water, it was doubtful Tilikum gave Dukes a warning. They are trained to understand when it is performing time and when it's not. This was not the case, nor was it common practice for humans to enter the tank at this time. This was different, so he was not required to comply with commands, and neither a whistle nor any other order was forthcoming. He was free to do whatever he pleased to the person who jumped into his tank, and with that possible thought, Tilikum attacked. Dukes had no chance and wasn't rational enough to even realize that a 22-foot killer whale was about to maul him. From his injuries, it was evident that the orca battered him, most likely with his snout. The impact of being rammed by a killer whale of this size would be enough to break Dukes' ribs, knocking him out cold. No human can withstand the force of 12,000 pounds. Dukes' bones must have shattered instantly. The whale then caught Dukes by the unlikeliest of places, his scrotum, and dragged him down to the bottom of the pool. One can only imagine the amount of torturous pain in that moment that Dukes felt. Sadly, Tilikum wasn't entirely done. The hunt had just begun. If captive orcas' attack have taught us anything, it is that they are not satisfied with their victims, even after they're dead. Tilikum then played brutally with Dukes' body, thrashing him like a rag doll, biting him, and almost churning him into putty. The next day, when the marine park trainers came around for the morning routine, the sight of Tilikum's pool horrified them. On the back of Tilikum lay the lifeless resemblance of what looked to be a human. The killer whale was proudly parading around in his pool with his new prize, and try as they might, he did not let any of the trainers near him. Eventually, Tilikum was manipulated to give up the body of Dukes, and it was shocking what the trainers found. Dukes was unrecognizable. He had lacerations, abrasions, and bruises all over his body. The most terrifying sight of all was his lower body. He had no genitals. They had been completely bitten off. Dukes' face was a mess. He looked so bizarre that his funeral had to be held in a closed casket. Unlike the first incident where Tilikum killed his trainer, the one concerning Dukes created a sensation. It was the first time the orca killed an outsider. The official report detailed how a nearly psychotic man and trespasser, with little regard for his own safety, drowned in a killer whale's tank. The orca's attack on Dukes may have been caught on camera, along with confirmed images of the orca swimming around with Dukes on his back, but SeaWorld has yet to release them. Daniel Dukes was indeed a troubled individual with a record of petty crimes. Still, being a human being, he will instead be remembered as Tilikum's second victim and the first significant incident at SeaWorld. The incident concerning Dukes did not do much to make SeaWorld sit up and take notice. In 2010, Tilikum would kill again in a manner that would shock the entire world. In front of a live audience, Tilikum would attack and kill trainer Brancheau, revealing a dark side to the orca, who thought nothing of attacking someone he had trained with for several weeks. The big question is, who is to blame? Is it Tilikum's fault? As one expert put it, these magnificent giant marine mammals live the equivalent of a human life in a prison cell without being a convict. The whales got bored, and when they do, they kill for sport, just like in the ocean. Be it a shark, a dolphin, or a human, they are different. Do you agree that such large animals should not be kept in captivity because the inevitable is bound to happen? When star trainer Alexis Martinez was dragged underwater by Keto, the killer whale, he knew for certain he was living his last moments on Earth. Just minutes before, their training session hit off to a great start, which is a routine session at Laura Park Zoo in the Canary Islands. Both man and beast knew each other well. They needed to make their Christmas Eve show special, but suddenly, the whale became the killer it was known to be. Alexis did not even get time to surface as the 6,600-pound orca rammed into him, battering his vital organs and dragging him deeper into the tank. Not satisfied, the orca crushed his bones as trainers watched from above, waiting for Alexis to surface. This is the tragic tale of Alexis Martinez, a man who wanted nothing but to live his dream of working with killer whales. The tragic death of Alexis Martinez by Keto, the killer whale, was terrifying. It stunned the trainers and eyewitnesses trying to figure out what was happening. Both Martinez and Keto had always looked so good together, so what went wrong? The Christmas Eve show is always a crowd puller at SeaWorld, and who better at the showstopper than Alexis Martinez and his favorite orca, Keto? Everyone knew them as friends. They were considered the best and had performed several shows without incident. It was 2009, just 3 years into Alexis Martinez's career, and his routine with Keto was chosen for the Christmas Eve show, an event always reserved for the most reliable performers. It was Alexis's big challenge and the ultimate test of his career. However, something in him picked at his brain. He wasn't quite ready for it. A few days earlier, he confided in his fiancée, Estonia, saying he was so tired. Alexis even revealed how the killer whales were growing disobedient, disruptive, and aggressive. It seemed that Alexis knew something bad was coming, but he didn't expect he would end up being the victim of his own gut feeling. Alexis Martinez grew up in Spain and had loved animals since he was a young boy. However, in 2004, he became ecstatic when he learned the zoo would receive 4 orcas from SeaWorld. These whales would soon become part of the new ocean world at Laura Park and would be performing as well. Alexis applied for the orca training program and was accepted. As he learned the ropes, he grew accustomed to the whales and soon became a popular trainer with the animals. Little did he realize how his dream would soon come to a tragic end. Alexis gained a lot of experience at Laura Park as an orca trainer. His fiancée, Estonia Rodriguez, said he was completely committed to his job. Alexis worked tirelessly at the Orca Ocean Department so that his routines would be perfect with these beautiful beasts. He soon became a favorite with the crowds, and Laura Park soon became a popular destination for tourists in Tenerife. Alexis, now an accomplished trainer, was the leading performer in showcasing the mighty killer whales and the awesome tricks that they were trained to do. It was Alexis who took charge of the rehearsals for every show. The staff at the park liked Alexis. He was a cooperative and courteous young man. As Alexis grew closer to the orcas, he realized the unseen problems associated with the job. Alexis began observing how the killer whales weren't entirely happy, while other staff denied that there was something wrong with the whales. He began to have safety concerns about them and noticed that they were becoming restless. The whales were not responding to commands like before, especially Keto. Keto was a 6,600-pound orca born in 1995 in captivity in SeaWorld. All his life, he knew nothing except living in a claustrophobic tank and entertaining crowds across the USA. In 2006, Keto suddenly found himself being transported a huge distance across the ocean to Laura Park. Unlike other whales captured from the ocean, Keto did not show much aggression, nor did he ever show signs of distress or rebellion. On December 24, 2009, Alexis found Keto in a good mood. That was a good sign. It would make Alexis's job easier. He entered the tank, swimming alongside Keto as he had always done before. He wanted the training session to go smoothly, making sure everything was right. He instructed other staff members around the enclosure to pick up any unwelcome gestures, but there were none. Rehearsing alongside with Alexis was fellow trainer Brian Rokeach, who positioned himself on the stage. The move Alexis attempted to rehearse was common. It had been done in SeaWorld several times. It was an awesome sight. He would dive underwater with Keto, punching on the whale's nose. It would look like a majestic and dramatic sight, like Aquaman emerging from his marine kingdom. It was all going well until suddenly Keto acted strangely. He began disobeying commands and refusing the cues, and with no warning, he just stopped performing as he should have. He kept bobbing up and down in the water alongside Alexis. Alexis tried to stunt again, but tumbled as Keto leaned to one side. Alexis wondered why Keto was misbehaving. He knew it was possible. Regardless of years of training, an orca is still a wild beast. They too, like all wild animals, can become unpredictable. Alexis did not realize how Keto was about to transform from Keto the orca to Keto the killer. Brian then shouted a command to Keto, which he obeyed. The whale was promptly rewarded with a bucket of fish. That did give Alexis hope, and he tried again. He would ride Keto down into the tank and then pull up onto the stage. The whale dragged him deeper into the 14-meter enclosure as soon as he went under. It forced Alexis to abandon the dive. At that moment, even the best trainer would never have expected he was being toyed with as a prey. When Alexis emerged from the water and attempted to climb out of the pool, Keto blocked the way. That move must have sent a cold, chilling shiver down Alexis' spine. Alexis Martinez might have even guessed that he was about to die. Alexis waited for Keto to calm down and begin swimming towards the pool's edge. Yet again, Keto blocked his path. The giant killer whale leaned into the trainer, just as a killer whale in the wild leans into its victims, trapping them so they can't escape. By now, alarm bells had to have been ringing in Alexis' ear. Something was wrong, and he had to escape the tank fast. His life depended on it. He requested a stage call via underwater tone, but something still needed to be done. Keto was not responding. He had ceased to become a whale in captivity. His sole intent was now to kill. The other trainers as well understood the gravity of the situation. Something had to be done. They tried using emergency signals, hoping the agitated whale would stop. But Keto didn't. He was enraged and angry. Years of frustration and anger were unleashed upon Alexis in one barbaric moment as he began headbutting Alexis to the bottom of the pool. No one could do anything. No one would dare get into the water at that moment. When a killer whale goes berserk, there is little a human can do. As Alexis sank deeper, Keto waited momentarily and rammed the trainer with his snout. That first deadly blow might have been as fatal as every organ in Alexis' body was torn apart. It is tragic, but perhaps if Alexis did die in that decisive moment, he was fortunate because the killer whale was not done. Not yet. Keto tore into Alexis again, crushing all his bones in the process. As if showing off his kill, Keto surfaced with the lifeless body of the young trainer balancing on the tip of his nose. He then dropped it, and Alexis' body again drifted down to the bottom of the pool. Keto prevented trainers from entering the pool by stalling them at the gate. Alexis' training and skill could not save him from the onslaught of the ferocious beast playing around with his body at the bottom of the tank. What went wrong that ill-fated Christmas Eve at Laura Park? The bloody incident instigated fear in all the other trainers. None of them ever got into the tank with orcas again. Laura Park's orcas entertainment was unofficially ended. The park authorities tried hushing up the sordid affair by stating that it was a case of drowning, but the autopsy spoke a different story. Alexis's vital organs were like putty. His bones were crushed, and his body was compressed and fractured. There were several bite marks all over him. Former SeaWorld trainer Jeffrey Varkezzi felt the whale acted out of intense frustration of not being rewarded despite giving its best. Apparently, its trainers didn't think so and withheld its reward, which cost him his life. The tragedy, regarded as unprecedented, was soon overshadowed a few months later when trainer Brancheau was bruised and battered to death by the notorious rebel orca Tilikum. It seemed the death of Alexis did not initiate action then. Still, it soon became part of why the orca breeding and marine entertainment was stopped. Do you think using wild animals with killer instincts to entertain people is justified? Is there ever any second chance? We may never know, but make sure to check the next video that will reveal the untold horrors behind Brancheau's orca attack. From the moment she set eyes on Shamu at SeaWorld, 10-year-old Dawn Brancheau decided she wanted to work at SeaWorld. 3 decades later, she was being dragged mercilessly by Tilikum, the orca, into his tank. What triggered the ruthless attack on Dawn still puzzles the experts, but for Brancheau, it was an agonizing way to go as the 22-foot killer whale treated her like a piece of meat. He thrashed her against the side of the tank relentlessly, breaking her bones and mutilating her until he felt her body go limp in his mouth. Even then, he wouldn't allow others near her. Dawn was Tilikum's third victim. This was never what she bargained for. This is the tragic true story of Dawn Brancheau, the SeaWorld trainer whose death changed everything. Dawn Brancheau was one of the most popular and loved trainers at SeaWorld in Orlando. She was their poster child and always the star attraction at every show. Beside the marine animals, Dawn raked in millions for SeaWorld, and her performances with orcas were the main attraction. Her Shamu show with Tilikum especially became world famous. Tilikum was used to Dawn and even shared a good rapport with her. The giant killer whale had been a performing orca at SeaWorld for 18 years, 2 years longer than when Dawn worked there. They were partners and the oldest workers there too, yet strangely their partnership ended in one of the worst tragedies that shocked the country. Dawn was born and raised in Cedar Lake, Indiana. When she was 10, her family took her on vacation to Orlando. Seeing the performance of Shamu at SeaWorld mesmerized Dawn. It changed her life forever. The majestic beauty of the orcas created an obsession for her and animals. She just had to work with them. In one interview, Dawn was quoted as saying, "I remember walking down the aisle at Shamu Stadium and telling my mom, this is what I want to do." It was her dream to do it, said Marion Laverde, Brancheau's mother. She loved her job. Soon after graduating from the University of South Carolina in psychology and animal behavior, Dawn began volunteering in animal shelters. She loved animals and kept 2 Labradors, stray ducks, chickens, rabbits, and birds at home. Dawn's love for animals finally landed her a job working with dolphins at Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey. In 1994, Dawn finally found her dream job at SeaWorld in Orlando. Dawn's role in SeaWorld grew into an important one. To manage the intense rigors of working with killer orcas, Dawn ensured she was physically fit and active. She ran marathons, participated in cycling races, and even pumped iron. Dawn became a leader, taking charge of the famous Shamu shows in SeaWorld. Dawn breathed new life into the Shamu show and became featured on billboards across Orlando. Ever since the first original Shamu debuted in SeaWorld, Orca always took its place, becoming an heir to the most popular brand in animal entertainment. When Dawn joined SeaWorld, Tilikum was still a newcomer, brought to SeaWorld Orlando in 1992. Tilikum, a 22-foot monster killer whale, was always a rebel. Right from his capture off the coast of Iceland in 1983 till he was sent to SeaWorld in 1992, he was never truly broken in. Tilikum lived in Sealand for 8 years. He was so notoriously disobedient that he would even get picked on by other whales for not behaving. When one orca displays disobedience, the entire pod at a marine park will go without food. The other orcas recognized how Tilikum was often the cause of their ill treatment, and they often thrashed him. On more than one occasion, Tilikum was found badly injured by other orcas. Adding to his problems was the little tanks meant for orcas. This was a creature taken from his environment, used to living in the vast expanse of an ocean, now made to exist in the solitary confines of a tin can. Tilikum was like a ticking time bomb waiting to explode, and it was tragically in the presence of Dawn Brancheau that he did. At SeaWorld, Tilikum's life was no different. Pacific Northwest whales, who regarded him as an outsider, battered and bruised him. When Tilikum and Dawn met, the human and beast instantly developed a rapport. It was evident that Dawn was Tilikum's favorite human, and they developed a close bond. Senior trainer John Hargrove remarked, he had a great relationship with her, and she had a great relationship with him. I do believe that he loved her, and I know that she loved him. On the sad day of February 24, 2010, Tilikum and Dawn were performing their famous Dining with Shamu show at SeaWorld. Beside an audience on the surface, hundreds were below witnessing the show through see-through glass in an open-air dining area. Everything was going as rehearsed. Dawn and Tilikum had done the show several times. It was all part of the job. Once they finished, Dawn laid on her stomach on the edge of the tank and began a nose-to-nose routine with Tilikum. Her long ponytail floated in the water and struck Tilikum's nose. No one is sure if this triggered his rage, but at that moment, Tilikum dragged Dawn into the water. Tilikum was no stranger to killing. He had already killed 2 trainers in the past. In 1991, he killed a young, inexperienced trainer, Keltie Byrne. In 1999, he killed 27-year-old trainer Daniel Dukes, who was so severely mutilated that there was not a single part of his body without injury. Even his genitals were bitten off. To get into the water with Tilikum and bond with him was extremely courageous of Dawn, but she eventually paid the price. The horror that unfolded at SeaWorld wasn't just caught on camera. Below the surface, hundreds of terrified tourists witnessed a horror movie come to life. People being served their cuisine felt too sick to touch their food as they saw Tilikum begin battering Dawn. The 5'4" whale dragged her deeper and began drowning her. Witnesses said he would not allow her to rise to the surface. Each time she broke free and tried swimming up for air, he dragged her back down. Tilikum began violently shaking Dawn's body. At times, he grabbed and shook her by the arm. Sometimes, he shook her by the leg. One witness described how he even thrashed and shook her around by the head. As Dawn tried escaping, he battered her with his snout. At one point, just when Dawn thought she had a chance and scrambled with all her strength towards the surface, Tilikum swam straight into her like a battering ram, hitting her squarely in the chest. Even as Dawn went limp from the impact, Tilikum went around the pool and returned, swimming at full speed towards her with his mouth open. It was as if the whale was battering a victim, his prey. People were witnessing the live mutilation of Dawn as Tilikum snapped off her arm and began chewing on it. This was even scarier than any scene from Jaws because this was being played out in real life. It was not color in the water but real blood. Dawn's blood that oozed from the mouth of Tilikum as he ate her arm. As if that wasn't enough, the whale chewed at her head and tore her scalp right off. People began screaming, and yet no one could do anything. The cruel and merciless battering broke Dawn's jaw, and one ear was seen dangling from her face. Her knees were broken. She could no longer move as her arms were fractured as well. Tilikum was a monster gone crazy. There were other smaller whales in the pool, but none participated in the bloody massacre. Meanwhile, the staff quickly swung into action, segregated the other whales into a neighboring pool, and attempted to save Dawn. Dawn was already dead. It was impossible to survive the battering she was receiving from Tilikum. Even as her body remained limp and lifeless, the whale was not done thrashing her around. Later, the coroner found that even Dawn's spinal cord had snapped and was severed in the attack. The entire staff at SeaWorld began slapping the water in hopes of intimidating Tilikum, who continued to thrash Dawn in his jaws. Paramedic Thomas Tobin rushed to the scene, but it was pointless. After 30 minutes, Tilikum was isolated in a special medical pool with a hydraulic base. Only then did trainers dive into the water to retrieve Dawn's body. One of the trainers found she had no scalp and dove back into the water only to find it laying at the bottom of the pool. As Dawn was being removed from the water, Tilikum looked agitated and tried getting back at her. It seemed the beast just wanted to rip her to shreds. Dawn was placed next to another pool, covered in a black sheet. Witnesses report seeing Tilikum repeatedly approaching the surface, trying to lift himself above the pool wall. Experts still can't pinpoint what happened to Tilikum and what triggered such rage in the orca. Some feel he had mistaken Dawn's ponytail for a toy, but was that really the case? The incident involving Dawn Brancheau prompted a documentary called Blackfish, Death at SeaWorld, where marine scientists attempted to analyze and explain the event. They felt that Tilikum was angered for not being rewarded after the show. The most logical and likely explanation was that Tilikum had snapped after 26 years of living in captivity, suffering beatings and being traumatized by the confines of his captive environment. Do you agree that marine animals as large as Tilikum should never live in captivity and be trained for human entertainment? Was Dawn Brancheau's merciless killing a disaster waiting to happen? We may never know, but remember, Dawn was the third victim of Tilikum. On February 24, 2010, tourists at SeaWorld in Orlando were excited, thinking they were about to watch an entertaining relationship session between Tilikum, a killer whale, and trainer Dawn Brancheau. Just as Brancheau leaned over the edge of his tank, the 11-ton orca reached up and chomped down on her head instead. What transpired next was a macabre scene of mayhem and carnage, as Tilikum dragged Brancheau into the pool, shook her like a rag doll, crushed her bones, and drowned her till she went limp and died. Even as the staff tried netting him, Tilikum savaged her and would not let go of her body. But why? What made the well-trained Tilikum, often described as gentle, go crazy? Dawn Brancheau wasn't the only human to suffer the unpredictability of Tilikum. Ever since the massive orca was captured as a 2-year-old calf in 1983, his life turned out tragically wrong. Brancheau was his third victim, and while it may seem puzzling to the people who trained and performed with him, others felt differently. Animal behavior experts felt it was his bizarre existence that led him to display extremes of behavior. Tilikum was a killer whale. He was born in the wild and meant to live in the ocean with his mother, not in an enclosure as an object for human amusement. As Helman Melville, author of Moby Dick, once wrote, "There is no folly of the beasts of the earth which is not infinitely outdone by the madness of men." He knew exactly what he was saying. Tilikum was always a rebel. He never took the training kindly, often creating trouble for his fellow orcas. It seemed he was never really tamed, and though the marine entertainment industry tried to pass off the Brancheau incident as an accident, and a playful incident gone wrong, several members of the audience felt the killer whale knew exactly what he was doing, and that is enough to creep anyone out. Tilikum was just a young orca when he was captured off the coast of eastern Iceland in 1983. Until the age of 3, he was kept at a marine zoo in Iceland. A year later, he was transported to a small aquatic park near Sealand of the Pacific in Victoria, British Columbia, where he performed for 8 years. He was transferred to SeaWorld in Orlando, Florida in 1992. Besides being one of the most notorious orcas perhaps in the history of marine world entertainment, Tilikum also sired 21 calves at SeaWorld. Former trainers at Sealand always remembered Tilikum as an orca with a friendly nature, but others begged to differ. There were reports from Sealand that described how Tilikum, from day one, did not fit into the life of a performing orca. He rebelled against training. Watching those orcas perform for you at any marine world might be incredible, but for human entertainment, an orca might just even have had to go without food if he didn't get his routine right in training. As is the custom, new orcas were usually paired with trained killer whales. Unfortunately, if the whale in training does not follow the cues of the trained whales, both animals will be deprived of food, and that's exactly what Tilikum would do. But then, that's when life began getting difficult for him. Other whales, frustrated at his behavior, began thrashing him. Tilikum would often be found bloodied, but he would also be found with a bleeding tooth. It was the beginning of hell, and it was probably what installed within Tilikum a type of stress and rage just waiting to burst out. Things went from bad to worse for Tilikum. Sealand was a living nightmare for the 16-foot orca. Of course, by the time he was fully adult size, he would end up weighing a whopping 12,000 pounds and measuring 22 feet long. But even for a 16-foot orca, living in an enclosure of 20 by 30 feet is almost akin to solitary confinement. Sealand was like a small marina surrounded by nets. The owners were always afraid some animal activists would try to free the whales. To prevent this, 3 orcas, including Tilikum, were confined to a single steel container, and that's when Tilikum would get thrashed every night.
And the lights were all turned out. So there's really no stimulation. They're just in this dark, metal, 20-foot by 30-foot pool.
It didn't feel good, and it was just wrong.
It's obvious how stressful that was for the whales, considering the fact that these large sea creatures travel almost 100 miles daily at sea. And here were 3 of them, not even allowed a fraction of that distance to move around. It's unfortunate that the violence being meted out to Tilikum was hardly being paid attention to. Clearly the whales were in distress, and distressed animals are often offensive, aggressive, and dangerous. The first sign of Tilikum's rage became evident in 1991, when at Sealand, a young, inexperienced female trainer, Keltie Byrne, fell into the pool that housed Tilikum and his 2 hostile companions. The trainer was instantly attacked by the whales, who dragged her around the pool. The terrified Byrne managed to swim for her life to reach the other end of the pool, but the whales were hot on her heels and dragged her back down. Other trainers tried their best distracting the whales. They even threw the girl a life ring, but the whales made sure she didn't get to it. Even though she surfaced twice, she eventually drowned. No one dared to try to recover her body, lest they suffered a similar fate. Her remains were only fished out of the water several hours later. Several theories abounded in attempts to explain the incident. Trainers never usually entered the pools of orcas, so it was assumed that the killer whales were caught by surprise and might have just been playing, keeping the girl underwater longer than she could hold her breath. No one will ever really know what could have been on their minds. The incident led to Sealand closing within a year, and that was when Tilikum was sold to SeaWorld Orlando. Besides performing, SeaWorld would go on to use Tilikum as a breeder. To them, the killer whale was a sperm producer worth millions. Even in SeaWorld, Tilikum was bullied and beaten by female Pacific Northwest whales. Putting an Icelandic orca with whales from different geolocations was just asking for trouble. From an orca's perspective, Tilikum was from another planet, and how the poor guy suffered for it. Tilikum struck again in 1999 when a 27-year-old man, Daniel Dukes, was found lying dead on Tilikum's back in his nighttime pool. SeaWorld stuck to its original story that Dukes was a vagrant who had climbed into Tilikum's pool and drowned. But animal rights activists and even the coroner's report revealed the sinister details of what really could have happened. Duke's body was found with several wounds, abrasions, and badly mutilated. Even his genitals were bitten off by the whale. It was never established what actually happened since there was no CCTV cameras present. Media reports played down the event, reporting that Dukes was a nuisance and a trespasser, but a documentary titled Blackfish challenged the theory that Dukes was a direct victim of Tilikum. The reality about how deadly Tilikum could be was finally revealed to the entire world during the incident when SeaWorld star trainer Brancheau was mauled by the star of their show, Tilikum. This time, there was no cover-ups, no fancy stories, or denials by authorities. The truth of the dangers of keeping orcas was laid bare, like some macabre showstopper on the ill-fated day of February 24, 2010. 40-year-old Brancheau was a regular performer with Tilikum. After she had completed a show with him, she fondly rubbed his nose as part of the post-show routine. Without warning, the orca grabbed her ponytail and pulled her into his tank. Witnesses have reported that the whale pulled her by the arm, while others said the whale pulled her by the shoulder. What transpired next was like some reality horror show for the audience witnessing a live mutilation of a human by one of the world's most dangerous predators. Tilikum scalped Brancheau and then chewed off her arm and ate it. Several trainers jumped into action by throwing food and nets over the killer orca, but Tilikum was having his day in the limelight. He wasn't about to stop. He finally got the world to believe he was dangerous and not supposed to be where he was. Tilikum shook Brancheau's body like a toy. The 12,000-pound orca wasn't going to let go. Even when trainers managed to direct him to a medical pool, he dragged Brancheau's body along with him. Brancheau was already dead by then. SeaWorld never really recovered from the deadly incident. Dwindling audiences, pressure from both human rights groups as well as animal activists finally led to the stopping of the orca breeding program. Thereafter, trainers were not allowed in the pool anymore. As for Tilikum, in 2016 his health began failing him, and he soon contracted bacterial pneumonia. He passed away on January 6, 2017. The mutilation of Brancheau and how she was killed by one of the world's most famous orcas was the highlight of the documentary Blackfish and the book Death at SeaWorld. Experts, attempting to analyze the reason for the attack, felt the orca thought he had done the right thing, yet he was not rewarded as was the custom. His frustration might have acted as a trigger to attack Dawn. Let me tell you something, folks. What a killer whale thinks is a tantrum is savagery for humans. Perhaps since Tilikum sees the world from the perspective of an orca, one cannot expect an orca to realize that humans are fragile midgets compared to their might and strength. Perhaps Tilikum's intention was never to kill, but we will never know. Who should be blamed for the death of Brancheau or Tilikum's other victims? Organizations like SeaWorld like to think the whales are part of their family, but that is not so. A whale's family is right there in the ocean, from whom they have been snatched away from. While that remains one opinion, what do you feel about places like SeaWorld keeping such monstrous killer whales captive for entertainment? For decades, SeaWorld has been a beloved theme park destination, known for its thrilling rides, charming dolphin shows, and mesmerizing killer whale performances. But behind the scenes, there's a much darker story, one of exploitation, abuse, even death. SeaWorld's long-standing history can be traced back to the early 1960s, when 4 UCLA graduates set out to start their underwater restaurant and marine life show. Its founders initially planned to build an underwater restaurant and marine life show, but their plans were deemed unfeasible, and they decided to open up a marine zoology park instead. The first SeaWorld park was a success and attracted 400,000 visitors in its first year. SeaWorld later opened additional parks in Ohio and Florida, and in 1988, it opened its largest park in Texas. In 1976, SeaWorld was bought by the publishing company Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, HBJ, for $12.7 million. HBJ later sold the theme park division to Anheuser-Busch, which placed the SeaWorld parks under the Busch Entertainment Corporation. In 2009, the Blackstone Group acquired Busch Entertainment, and the company became known as SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment. Killer whales symbolize voiceless creatures trapped in perpetual captivity. Director Gabriella Cowperwait's documentary Blackfish, which came out in 2013, was the first of many signs that something was seriously off about SeaWorld. The heart-wrenching documentary raised many questions about the morality of SeaWorld keeping orcas, or killer whales, in captivity when it results in dire risk for the animals' well-beings as well as human safety. The film mainly focused on the tragic story of the 12,000-pound male orca Tilikum, which was involved in the deaths of 3 humans. Since its inception, SeaWorld has ordered the capture of orcas for decades to force them to perform at their shows. The hunters use spotters, speedboats, nets, airplanes, and worst of all, explosives and bombs to herd the whales into coves. Once surrounded, the young orcas were selected and cruelly separated from their crying mothers. An orca named Shamu was the first killer whale to perform in an orca show at SeaWorld back in 1965. The tragic backstory behind Shamu's capture is every animal lover's nightmare. The baby orca had been abducted from her mother, who was shot with a harpoon and killed right in front of her during the capture. Shamu died just 6 years later, and SeaWorld continued to use the name for other orcas who performed at the theme park and even trademarked it, as if animal cruelty is something to be proud of. According to National Geographic, 70 orcas have been born in captivity, and another 30 died in utero, or were stillborn since 1977. It's reported that orcas can live up to 100 years in the wild, yet none of them have made it even close to 30 years before they died in a tiny, dark concrete tank in SeaWorld. Most adult orcas don't even leave their mother's side. When removed from their families and placed in small tanks, orcas can become depressed and aggressive. However, at SeaWorld, it's common practice to forcibly separate a calf from its mother when it is 4 years old or younger. When an orca named Kasatka had her calf Takara taken from her, she floated lifelessly in the corner of the tank. The bereaved mother was shaking, screeching, and crying from the complete heartache of her child's separation. A former SeaWorld orca trainer, John Hargrove, witnessed the heartbreaking event and stated she was emitting vocalizations that had never been heard before. Just the thought of a distraught Kasatka emitting long-range vocals to find Takara and communicate with her daughter is downright horrific. It's not just a forceful separation and isolation from their kin that drives the orcas into complete psychosis. For starters, SeaWorld tank sizes for the captive orcas are less than adequate, to put it mildly. Their tanks are only 35 feet deep, but in the wild, orcas dive up to 1,000 feet and travel at least 100 miles daily. Being cooped up in tiny metal tanks would be enough to drive anyone crazy. On top of that, captive whales, such as Tilikum at SeaWorld and Lolita at Miami Seaquarium, were forced to live in isolation in small tanks. Lolita lives alone in a pool that is less than twice the length of her body, while Tilikum was kept in a small medical pool for his protection. Due to their severely cramped quarters, captive orcas suffer from poor health and short lifespans. The critically acclaimed documentary Blackfish brought the world's attention to the tragic life of Tilikum, an orca held in captive at SeaWorld for decades. The film follows Tilikum's journey from the moment he was ripped from the pod of his family and home at just 2 years of age to the point of his death in 2017. Throughout his time at SeaWorld, Tilikum was subjected to a variety of abuses. He was forced to perform for his food and was used as a breeding machine, fathering 21 calves, 11 of whom died. He was held in small tanks, isolated from his family and other orcas, and was denied any autonomy or control over his own life. The isolation and confinement Tilikum faced, along with the constant breeding, drove him to his breaking point. In 2010, he killed his senior trainer, Don Pachu, in an incident that was captured on video and broadcast around the world. The death of Brancheau finally brought to the public's attention the mistreatment and abuse of orcas at SeaWorld. It was a turning point in the fight to end the captivity of marine mammals. In the wake of Brancheau's death, SeaWorld faced intense scrutiny, and Tilikum was punished for his role in the incident by being kept in solitary confinement for a year. But the damage had already been done, and Tilikum's 33 years in captivity had taken a devastating toll on him. He died of a bacterial lung infection in 2017, but his legacy lives on through the documentary and the movement it inspired to end the captivity of marine mammals. The death of Tilikum and the story of his life in captivity at SeaWorld was a powerful catalyst for change. It brought to light the suffering of marine mammals in captivity and the negative impact that captivity has on their physical and mental well-being. The documentary Blackfish and the story of Tilikum has been instrumental in raising awareness and inspiring action to end the captivity of marine mammals. And in the years since it was released, many marine parks around the world have been forced to close or change their policies on keeping marine mammals in captivity. As the pressure from animal rights groups continued to mount, SeaWorld found itself in a difficult position. The company had built its entire brand around the captivity and display of orcas, and the thought of losing these beloved animals from their parks was a daunting prospect. However, PETA's tireless campaigns and the mounting criticism from the public made it clear that something had to change. After much debate and discussion, SeaWorld made the difficult decision to end its orca breeding program and to stop allowing trainers to stand on the animals during shows. This was a huge victory for PETA and other animal rights organizations, but the fight was far from over. PETA continued to push for change by obtaining 163 shares of SeaWorld, which allowed them to be heard at a shareholders' meeting. They used this platform to make a powerful case for the release of orcas in captivity and to raise awareness about the atrocities committed by marine theme parks. The public's growing awareness of these issues, thanks in part to the efforts of groups like Empty the Tanks and Boycott SeaWorld, had a significant impact on SeaWorld's bottom line. Guest numbers and profits began to decline as more and more people chose to stay away from the parks in protest of its treatments of animals. In 2016, SeaWorld finally agreed to remove all live shows for entertainment, like One Ocean, in an attempt to appease its critics and stem the tide of negative publicity. It was a significant step forward, but for many animal rights activists, it was not enough. The fight to end the captivity of marine mammals continued, with the goal of one day seeing all of these magnificent creatures living free in the wild. Despite these changes, SeaWorld still faced significant financial challenges in the years that followed. Attendance at the park continued to decline, and the company struggled to find a way to turn things around. Many animal rights activists saw this as a sign that the company's previous practices were unsustainable and that they needed to do more to truly make amends. In 2023, PETA continues to monitor SeaWorld's actions and advocate for the welfare of the animals in their care. While some progress has been made, PETA is still pushing for the release of the remaining orcas and other marine mammals in captivity to seaside sanctuaries. The organization also continues to educate the public about the negative impact of marine theme parks and the importance of protecting these animals in their natural habitats. While SeaWorld has brought joy and wonder to millions of visitors over the years, it has also faced fierce criticism for its treatment of its orcas and its role in the capture of wild killer whales. As we move forward, it is important that we continue to engage in important conversations about the welfare of marine animals and the ethical implications of keeping them in captivity. Whether you support SeaWorld or not, it is clear that the park and its killer whales have played a significant role in our culture and environmental history, and will continue to do so for years to come.